which leads in well to the next point around, if you like, the Uberification. I spoke to John Baker, a former KPMG colleague, a couple of years ago, whenever it was.
Yes, that's correct.
And he kept using the English example, spoke about the need for innovation and change, and he's now leading a little package of his own.
That's right.
Which is a really interesting prospect. Are you seeing interesting innovations coming through like that? I mean, we've seen things like clickability and some of those things which are worthwhile, but they sort of seem to be at the edges. Are you seeing any genuine transformation stuff starting to happen?
I think it's beginning. I think it's in small pockets. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons it's only beginning is the big players that are interested in moving into this area have been a bit perplexed about the regulatory context, and because of the political dialogue about is there enough money in the system and are the cost of services correctly priced, people have been sitting on the fence and watching and observing, and I think awaiting. And I think there's two schools of thought. There's a school of thought that says get in early and grab some territory, and I think some of those players are doing that. And others are saying, why don't we wait, let the transition process conclude, let's then have a look at what the market looks like, and then find the place that we can play where there's white space, a capacity to play where there may be not strong competitors or no competitors. So I think it's a story to yet unfold.
Okay. What have you seen, specifically in our disability, we've been talking about NDIS, using your global experiences, the stuff you've seen in your other countries that we can learn from? We always think NDIS is groundbreaking internationally, which it is, but I'm sure there's other great stuff happening overseas that we can learn from.
This is a really tricky question, because I went with a really open mind when I started this role 2 years ago, expecting to be overwhelmed with innovation in other countries. But we are still seeing many of the countries that I support impacted by the remnants of the global financial crisis. And the United Kingdom is but one example of that. And so though there's a lot of personalisation that exists, through the austerity measures of the United Kingdom and the government there, what we are seeing is a much stronger focus on cost. And cost is not a good time for reform because it creates conflicting messages. And so I think we can learn something from the United Kingdom about personalisation and personalised budgets. But in terms of system level reform, I think we need to look to Australia or to New Zealand, to be frank. Canada's interested in what we're doing in Australia. The United States has fantastic programs, but it doesn't have a system in the way that we understand it. And so we've got learnings there about really good practice, but it's in particular delivery models. And so I think for us, we need to look in Australia, look to New Zealand in what it's doing, particularly in income support and the reforms there. And also in its new child agency, Oranga Tamariki, where it's trying to put the voice of the child into the centre of what it does, similar to what we're doing in disability, but in a different way. So I think there's some learnings that could be really advantageous, particularly about community-based practice and working with community assets to better support inclusion. And this is of vulnerable children, but I think some of those principles apply to disability. And I think we're missing part of that trick in Australia at the moment.
And indeed, many of those vulnerable children have disabilities too. I mean, there's a crossover.
That's right.
We've tended to put them into silos
That's
for
right.
years. At tipping, we see people with a disability. Some of them are young, some of them are vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's been an awareness that's taken a while for us to get to as well. So,
yeah.
Are there any particular organisations you've seen you go, actually, they're doing some really good stuff that we can pinch?
Well, there are, but they're more about models of practice, yeah? And a lot of it is fairly straightforward, but for a whole range of reasons, we haven't been doing a lot of it in Australia. And a lot of it's about working in situ, in place, with families and the person with a disability, and working at their pace, doing the things that they want to do, and using community assets. That's probably where I see burgeoning strength. You mentioned clickability. There are other digital type solutions out there, and I think we've yet to tap those fully. But the merging of those two things together in the least interventionist way possible is possibly what the future holds, I think, for many people with disabilities.
So practice change combined with better technology?
Yeah, I think so. And I think shifting the workforce.
Yep.
We've really been very worried about the workforce being very task-oriented. And, you know, if you go into many group homes, they're often pristinely managed, incredibly neat, all done and dusted in terms of breakfast, lunch and dinner, to the extent that they don't look like a home. Now, that's not true for all, but it's true for some. You come to my home and it's chaos, right? And it's not neat, and it's not this, and it's not that. And we just don't have that vibrancy, we don't have that sort of fabric in the way that we provide services, and thinking about how we can do that a little bit better. And I think with that comes a move away from the technology that we expect our workforce to have to the values that we expect our workforce to have.
And it's that shift from using the house example, from it being the workplace to being the home
That's
for
right.
the residents or the participants, from having a well-structured, ordered, mum's in charge type approach that's everything spick and span, but actually doesn't have a soul.
That's right, exactly. And the trouble is, we've been talking about this for 30 years, right? This is not a new concept. But I actually think because we won't have the prescription that will come with the way that programs operate and have traditionally operated under the NDIS, and we'll have greater flexibility, we might actually get some of that fabric into what we're looking for and greater sense of soul.
Technology, any particular areas there that you're seeing that are exciting?
I think the area of wearables will be really useful in the long term.
For monitoring?
For feedback.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word monitoring because it sounds like surveillance, but I think for feedback, for reminders, for ability to connect with family, for that information that people are needing to feel comfortable that their family member is actually safe and secure, but without being invasive, so they can actually get on and lead their lives. There's something in that technological space that I think has enormous potential to facilitate independence.
And also reduce cost.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
very few people want someone else living in their house if they can avoid it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it does change the delivery model.
It does. And if you choose, if the family chooses that's the way to go, then it's an informed choice.
Yeah.
Keep the cost down.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone's a winner in that.
Absolutely. And you've got a risk management strategy in place at the same time.
It's a big shift.
It's a huge shift. But we're seeing it in aged care, right, which is really helpful because I think there's good lessons to learn from that, particularly when we're wanting to support older people living at home for as long as possible. There's lessons there that we can learn in disability. And I suppose if you had to pick the global trend, I think it's about convergence. And I think it's about no longer thinking about disability and aged care and health. It's all about a set of solutions out there that can solve the conundrum for the individual. And if we can move from our siloed mentality, there's great learnings from many sectors that we can take.